For 60 years, the Duke of Edinburgh has been half of one of the most celebrated and enduring partnerships of modern times. But what do we really know about him?
Who was this penniless foreign youngster who'd nabbed the heir to the throne?
He'll bark at you straight away. He does that to everyone, and actually he responds better if you treat him in the same way.
He's a great action man.
Quick-witted, funny, irascible.
The Duke of Edinburgh is a gift to the media because he will be incredibly rude to them, and that becomes the story.
Frankly, you probably ought to go and talk to the Duke of Edinburgh by himself about that.
Prince Philip is not a man who forgets grudges.
Would we rather have a dumb, boring English duke, or somebody who occasionally did seem to step out of line and made a mistake?
He has an inclination to always support the underdog.
The Duke of Edinburgh was someone who brought life and verve and dynamism to our university at Edinburgh.
Hello, sir. He rather fancies himself as a dog trainer.
Oh, really? But you know, the thing about Prince Philip, nobody ever leaves him.
I just know him as the Duke.
The Duke of Edinburgh has invited me to Sandringham, the royal family's private estate in Norfolk.
How are we for sound? Are we all right, guys? So, yeah, well, we asked you to count to 5. If that's not
what
too...
about you counting to 5?
Well, I can count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
6, 7, 8, 9,
10. That's much better. How's that?
The estate is just over 20,400 acres. The perimeter of the estate is 62 miles. The areas that His Royal Highness is taking Sir Trevor are not normally open to the public. It's a special opportunity to see parts of the estate that wouldn't normally otherwise be available.
This is the Coronation Avenue.
It's a glorious drive through.
Yes. The only trouble is that, like so many of these avenues, they planted the trees too close together. Some years ago, I said, look, let's thin them out, get them... Because the bloody idiot chose the best trees, so that in some cases they're much too close together, like those two, for instance.
Yes.
And then the next place, it's a huge gap. This is Park House. This is where Princess Diana was born.
Was she born there?
Was she born there? Park House.
I didn't realise.
Well, I lived there until her father moved.
The sort of day we could do with some global warming, sir, I think.
Should have bought my umbrella anyway.
So you were asked to manage this estate, sir, were you?
When the Queen succeeded, we sort of chatted about who would do what, I suppose. And I thought that if I could relieve her of the management of the estates, it would save a lot of time.
Yes. We arrive at a favourite spot, which also happens to be one of Britain's most important wildlife sites.
Do you want to get up and look?
Is that all right, sir?
Yes. Make a blackguard rush at it.
Yes, exactly. I was just thinking, sir, it's not a very good idea this weather.
Not brilliant, is it?
After you've just had a chest infection. But you're feeling all right now, aren't you?
Oh, yes, thank you.
It was just over 60 years ago, here at Westminster Abbey, that Prince Philip became a member of the royal family when he married Princess Elizabeth.
Let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God.
6 decades later, the family and the nation returned to celebrate. No British monarch in history had reached a diamond wedding anniversary before. After revisiting their entry in the Abbey marriage register, the Queen and the Duke met other couples who were married on the same day.
After 60 years together, what is so lovely is they are still so much in love with each other, which is wonderful. With such a strong couple, you know, you can think of a sweet old Darby and Joan, but they're not a sweet old Darby and Joan by any means. They're both very strong characters.
In private, the family celebrated with a dinner at Clarence House, after the customary photograph.
It is very interesting that you have this extraordinary contrast between the way in which Prince Philip behaves in public. He defers, quite rightly, because she is the Queen. She's the ultimate, she's the boss, she's anointed, and he's just the husband. But the minute the doors clang shut and they're in private, it changes. He will feel perfectly able to say, that was a bloody stupid remark you made about so-and-so, so-and-so, and she'll take it, because in private, he was the guy who wore the trousers. Keep your eye on the little guy. It was he really who decided where the children were going to go to school, and in a family sense, he's the boss.
You're going to feed us now. He's been slaving away in the kitchen for ages.
After his wedding, the Duke discovered that there is no constitutional role for a Queen's husband, but he had his own ideas.
He has made a very, very busy and extremely influential life for himself. And that actually, perhaps more than anything else, is a lesson in duty. Just getting on, head down, getting on with your job. Sometimes very much in the public eye, sometimes just working away quietly.
Buckingham Palace is the nerve centre for the Duke and his team.
Every day there's new bids for Prince Philip's time. He's very much a man in demand, so as a result his post bag is always pretty full.
He has over 800 different patronages, leaving aside what he does in support of the Queen. Those cover everything from sport through to health to art, WWF, in other words, the natural environment.
You know, last year, for example, he completed 380 engagements. And here we've got another of the filing cabinets you saw earlier. This one is an extension, although it's much bigger. It goes back down into the basement. This is a collection of photographs which the girls have put together over the years from Prince Philip's various visits. They're obviously very much in his fan club.
One of the earliest organisations adopted by the Duke was the Air Training Corps. After 55 years, he remains Air Commodore-in-Chief.
Standard, east.
Today, the Duke is opening a new squadron headquarters in King's Lynn.
I was talking to my mum about him. I went, Mum, I'm going to go see the Duke of Edinburgh and Prince Philip. She's like, it's the same person. I was like, oh.
I know he's very keen on young people learning. So I'm hoping we're going to be able to show him some of that today. I mean, they're going to show him how the radios work.
Mike Romeo Oscar 24, Mike 3. This is Mike Romeo Oscar 24, Mike 2. Radio check, over.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance, really, to meet the Duke of Edinburgh.
The people who've met him said he's quite funny, that he's not some stuck-up royal kind of person, so...
Carry on.
We've got 10 radios and we've also got a base station that we can take when we go to Thetford.
Can you listen into anything interesting on this?
You switch one of those on.
Well, it doesn't get into the police network.
No. Oh, no. I think we just did.
You just did?
I think so.
And you do some gliding. Where did you do the gliding?
VGS Watton. So.
You haven't been taken up and made to feel sick. Anyway.
Back on the Sandringham estate, the tour continues.
Oh, this could be interesting.
Shut up, you stupid.
Before marriage took him down the path of royal duty, the Duke of Edinburgh had a promising career in the Royal Navy. A junior officer at the start of the Second World War, he soon saw action at the Battle of Mountbatten in the Mediterranean in 1941, while serving under Admiral Cunningham.
Prince Philip served very effectively in the British Royal Navy. He was mentioned in dispatches at Mountbatten, he was out in the Far East, and he saw active service throughout the Second World War. And I think he was hoping, and indeed expecting, that he would be able to pursue a naval career for quite a number of years.
The Windsors are a forces family, and the Duke has close ties with all three services. Today, as Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, he welcomes a regiment back from their latest tour of Afghanistan.
The Grenadier Guards were involved in some of the fiercest fighting the army has seen in recent years. In Afghanistan last year, we suffered 5 fatalities and 32 seriously wounded.
Very nice to see everybody back again. As you know, I think everybody in this, certainly in the family of the regiment, have been paying close attention to what you've been up to. And I think everybody here is very proud of the way you performed in Afghanistan.
The Colonel, the Duke of Edinburgh, he's been through the mill as well. He's been in the Second World War. He knows about fighting, and he's on the same wavelength as what you are, you know, regardless of his title, etc.
That's not Shadrach, Your Royal Highness.
And you got a...
Shrapnel in the next for a suicide bomber, sir.
You survived with that?
I did, sir.
You lose a lot of blood?
11 units, sir. Last time I met him, he was quite a funny guy. My girlfriend at the time was a nurse, and he... in fact, I better not say it. Get me in trouble.
The City of London. The Duke is due to launch the Colonel's Fund for injured grenadiers and bereaved families.
Guys, can you all listen in? The Grenadier Guards have a reputation of immaculate turnout. I want you to check that your shoes are immaculate. I want you to think of yourself as a guardsman for the night.
This is the Prince Philip martini, which is a little different from how you normally make martinis. He likes the lemon to go in with the mixing of the drink. We've been making martinis for Prince Philip for years, only a little bit of vermouth. You should stir that around, so you get...
Well, he's been our colonel for a long time now, and he understands the strains. He's had a family, and his own family have been servicemen. He's immensely approachable. He's hugely supportive. He speaks his mind. He's a plain speaker, and soldiers appreciate that.
Tonight, the martini remains on the tray. The Duke prefers a glass of water.
So we've got a selection of guys who are wounded now. We've got Sergeant MacDonald, sir, and he got lots and lots of ball bearings. They put ball bearings into the explosives, and he had a lot that came through, a lot of his teeth, and his helmet saved his life. Yeah, exactly.
Shake your head, it doesn't rattle on you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I remember everything, really. I remember getting flipped into the air. I remember seeing my leg facing me.
I received shrapnel injuries to my right side, my right leg, left leg, both arms, both hands, side of my face.
I lost the lower part of my right leg.
Recovery was long, very long, but you know, I was in hospital with a... Excuse me, sorry.
Among those in the room tonight, only the Duke knows that his grandson, Prince Harry, is currently serving in Afghanistan.
So.
I just wanted to confirm, although it's called the Colonel's Fund, it's not for me. And all the services are now being called upon to face problems and difficulties which they haven't done for a number of years, because there's a huge, about overstretch, but a great many people are being asked to work very hard and very long hours abroad under difficult conditions.
The Duke has ridden a very careful path. He has very strong opinions, and he knows a lot about certain areas of public life. The armed services would be an obvious example. And where he feels the need to speak out, he will put his head above the parapet. But I think he's always been very careful not to do anything that could be seen as political.
It's very much an issue for them, isn't it? the welfare of servicemen who come back, some injured.
Well, all the regiments run their own charitable trusts, and they take all of them take a lot of interest in their old comrades and people who are in trouble and distress. But of course, with all this business in all these wounded in Afghanistan and Iraq, of course, the demands are that much greater.
The Duke's own services career continued through the early years of marriage, although there were occasional royal engagements with the princess. Then in 1952 came the news which would change both their lives forever.
I mean, there is absolutely no question that the worst thing that happened in Prince Philip's life after he married Princess Elizabeth was the death of the king. Because at that point, effectively, his naval career came to an end and he didn't have the opportunity to rise to the top of the Navy, and I think that was very depressing for him. But he then, of course, immediately found himself in different circumstances and began to address how he could turn that to the best advantage.
From having been the very active head of the family, he now will be cast in a supporting role. But for a very active man, real action man, that was very hard to begin with, because he had to find out the kind of career he could make for himself.
The minute the Queen became Queen, and was no longer just a princess, the whole apparatus surrounded her, took her off, and as far as the officials were concerned, Prince Philip had no standing. He was regarded with intense suspicion by the British establishment. Indeed, it would have been a preferred option for many people for the Queen to have married an actually rather dim British duke.
At one point, when somebody rather disdainfully, after he married the Queen, said, "We think you'll rather like Windsor Castle when you get to know it," and he said, "Thank you very much, my mother was born here," as indeed she had been as a great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria.
He had to make a role of his own. There was nobody to follow. He made the way that he is now, he made himself by the force of circumstance. Whether he actually ever imagined that it would involve 800-odd patronages and organizations all wanting a little bit of him, I doubt.
First of all, I want to say how very, very glad I am to be here tonight. Secondly, I'd like to say how very pleased I am that I've been persuaded to become patron of the London Federation of Boys' Clubs.
More than 60 years he's been our patron. And he understands very well what we do. He knows that if you back young people and give them a challenge, they rise to it.
Good catch, guys! It's volleyball with a twist.
But you can use your hands as well.
Throughout the Duke's years as patron, the aim has remained the same, supporting youth groups like this one, AbFab.
Doesn't matter what disability you have, don't have a disability. It's just everyone all together. That's what AbFab is about, to integrate everybody.
That's it, that one? Yep.
There's lots and lots of levels.
Player one, go on there, Michael.
The youngsters would like to present you with a hoodie, sir.
We thought it's so.
And this gentleman actually designed the logo.
And there's one on
the back that says HRH for you.
I've done the Duke's initials with a lion with a crown.
Oh, it's in here. This is.
Oh, that's it.
It's part of the design.
God, that's splendid. Oh, that's very kind. We'll have to try it on. Well, not here. Have you got one of those?
A few days later, the Duke again turns his hand to the other side of royal patronage. London youth needs funds.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, I know that the young people of the AbFab Club
They were delighted to be able to present you with a hoodie that they had made, one of the hooded sweatshirts, and I've had at least 3 telephone calls since last week asking me whether they think you're enjoying wearing it.
His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
Young people, babies, are born totally ignorant and totally inexperienced, and they've all got to grow up and they've all got to acquire experience and understanding. If you don't give young people the opportunities to find out about life, to find out what's worth doing, and to be able to develop their capacities and their physical abilities, they're never going to get anywhere. So thank you very much for taking an interest in it. And for those of you who you find that lunches are seldom free.
He has been able to play a major part in all sorts of areas which the Queen couldn't have got involved in and wouldn't have got where they are as organisations without a push and sometimes a jolly hard shove.
But it was as long-serving leader of another organisation that the Duke was at his most outspoken.
What do you think are the most serious issues faced by conservationists and World Wildlife Fund over the next 20 years or so?
95% of the whole of the Atlantic rainforest in Brazil has disappeared in the last 100 years. There is simply nowhere for these animals to live. At the basis of it all is this colossal increase in the human population. It's one of the living species of the planet, but it's reaching plague proportions.
Here at Sandringham in Norfolk, the Duke of Edinburgh has managed a 20,000-acre royal estate for more than half a century. It's allowed him to pursue one of his great passions, conservation.
Well, there's a couple of French partridges these days. These are the sort of things we breed. They're incredibly stupid birds. They will run it, but in front of the car. Yeah. Go on, you silly animal. She gone outside of it, must have been.
I think probably,
we run over
hopefully we left him or her behind.
That was her.
Yeah. But you've always been interested in conservation long before it became terribly, terribly fashionable.
When I was a president of WWF International, and that was supposed to be for 3 years. At the end of 2.5 years, they then rewrote the statutes. You know? And they said, well, you start again. I ended up by doing 15 years.
In 1961, the Duke became president of World Wildlife Fund UK. Many years before environmental issues became part of the political agenda, the Duke took a stand.
It's totally useless for a lot of well-meaning people to wring their hands in conference and to point out the dangers of pollution or destruction of the countryside if no one is willing or capable of taking any action. The impassioned speeches will be so much effluent under the bridge unless it is followed by drastic political action. Well, sir, time is fast running out.
The Duke knew very well that animals are dependent upon their environment, and indeed the whole conservation movement was aware that whereas it was easy to start by saying, there's a giant panda, it's a rare animal, unless we do something it's going to disappear, that is a very oversimplified view of things.
In the emerging era of television and global marketing, the WWF recruited the panda as its logo. The world went panda crazy. But the Duke kept his eye on bigger issues.
Well, the panda now being so very well known worldwide, how do you see the policy of the World Wildlife Fund developing?
What we're trying to do, at least in future, is to try and persuade people to, as much as possible, to coexist with the natural wildlife in their areas.
The Duke sought allies of every sort to spread the environmental message. He even lobbied the Pope. But you also had this idea that you brought conservationists and leaders of religions together. Was that
much later? Yeah.
Much later. And the idea behind that was?
It seemed to me that most religions attributed the world to some special creation. And I said, well, look, if you believe that God created the world, you ought to take an interest in its well-being.
I was interested in reading that because at some points some religious teaching would sort of conflict with what some of the needs of conservation are. I'm thinking about, you know, the arguments which lead to population explosion and all that.
Well, no, the consequences of population explosion is what matters.
How did they get around that?
Well, we didn't. You can generalize about that. You quite obviously didn't confront them about that because it's not a direct issue as far as conservation is concerned. Well, I think it's a direct issue for the future of the globe. I think because, well, look what's happening now. The food prices are going up. Everybody thinks it's to do with not enough food. It's really, the demand is too great.
Yes, too many people.
Too many people, yeah.
Yes.
Basically, it's a little embarrassing for everybody. And nobody quite knows how to handle it because nobody wants their family life to be interfered with by the government.
It's certainly the case that the Duke of Edinburgh saw the conservation problems ahead of many people. People now realise that conservation is not just about them out there, it's about us. It's about our survival as well as the natural world, the rest of the natural world.
Queen Elizabeth National Park in Uganda is preparing a royal welcome. The Duke first came here with the Queen in 1954. Today, he's back to open a centre which will bring internet access to the area.
Having a person of his caliber visit here creates big publicity about the park and will bring in more tourists here, will bring in more resources which will go back to the local people.
This is Tom Okello, who's the Chief Warden of the Game Park.
Yes. How many other of you?
We
are
many.
We
are about 200
staff.
During the lunch that we had with the Duke, he talked about the need to try and encourage sport hunting to be able to stop, poaching for the wildlife for future conservation. I'm going to look up to know more about him.
The local people here are living side by side with the wild animals. Their future prosperity depends on it.
Your Royal Highness, this gentleman used to be the Member of Parliament for this area.
I was going to say, it's not a lot of constituents.
Yes, and the boundary was in the middle of the channel.
Elephants don't have votes, do they?
Well, they used to vote for me,
Your Royal Highness.
It's not often this community receives such a guest.
No, that's all right.
Another one?
Who's blind life retired?
This is for Queen Elizabeth. You don't know why
Who's that? You just thought of it this morning, is it?
The Duke has given conservation an important voice. He's written books, appeared on television programs, and delivered hundreds of speeches on the subject. Although he's frequently had to reconcile his concern for the natural world with his love of country sports. The birds aren't bred here for shooting, are they, sir? No.
Well, that's not entirely true. We don't breed any pheasants here. In this area, we put down a few French partridges, but there's really... The pheasant population fluctuates, obviously.
Yes.
But you just adjust. I mean, you aim to shoot the surplus, as it were, that's all. Conservation is not a romantic business, it's a very practical business of trying to ensure that as many different species of wildlife can coexist.
Making harsh choices.
Yes, it's making choices, yeah. I mean, for instance, you get practically no wild pheasants if you didn't control the foxes. You wouldn't get any partridges if you didn't control the rats. And then you get really awkward problems, like, for instance, people don't like to admit it, but cats catch an enormous number of small wild birds. But of course, people are very attached to their cats. I mean, I don't blame them, but I mean, it's a fact of life.
the Duke's environmental principles are not confined to the countryside.
He's not just an empty theorist. I mean, he does something about it. He had, as far as I know, one of the very first electric cars that purred along, making no noise whatever, with the Duke of Edinburgh sitting at the back.
This is the Duke of Edinburgh's Bedford Smith's electric vehicle, which was used in the early 80s. And if you just look under the bonnet, this is the charging point, which charges a big battery pack underneath the chassis. I think a maximum 40 miles an hour. But obviously the interior is lovely and plush, being home from home, really. The motor is 240 volts, so unfortunately it's not laid on the road anymore.
He now has another eco-friendly runaround for the city. This one runs on LPG.
The taxi, which is a metrocab, is one he uses almost all the time in London. It works a treat there. He goes through the traffic without any outriders. Nobody notices because it's just another metrocab.
I believe at least one occasion somebody has seen a taxi and gone up, tapped on the window and asked the so-called taxi driver the way to somewhere else, and then been seen wandering off, scratching his head, wondering whether he'd really seen the Duke of Edinburgh sitting in the back of a taxi.
The Duke has always had an interest in new technology. Here, at a favourite retreat on the Sandringham estate, he installed some of Britain's very first solar panels.
I'd seen them in Australia and places, and I thought we might try and see whether that would reduce the cost of heating.
Yeah.
I think it's made a huge difference, but between 5 and 10%, I suppose. But what it does do is it takes the tap water, I mean the groundwater supply, and warms it up before it goes into the boiler. So it's energy saving rather than, it's not an alternative system.
No, but that's very popular these days, isn't it? I mean, the whole idea of that kind of renewable energy.
It probably works very well in Australia. I don't suppose it works.
not on days like this.
Well, I think Prince Philip's really interested in almost everything, but not superficially. I mean, he goes to the core of it each time.
Being Chancellor of currently two major universities, Edinburgh and Cambridge, gives him the opportunity to go and see and encourage. And the important thing, I think, is the encouraging innovation of the arts and the sciences.
One of the model containers.
He lights up when he can get in amongst the students. But I think he's very interested in development, in technology. He seems to show every bit as much interest now as when he first came to the university many years ago.
The Duke has been Chancellor of Cambridge University for more than 30 years, twice as long as that other famous royal consort, Prince Albert.
I've been here before and opened practically every other building. And if you go on doing this, you're going to have to change the name of the college.
He's also Chancellor of Edinburgh University, where he's always appreciated the students' point of view.
At that time, I was a student-elected rector to chair the university court by the whole student body. And of course, none of the academics or the professional people who sat on the court wanted me to chair their university governing body, but I did. And the one person who gave me enormous encouragement and support was the Duke of Edinburgh himself. He saw the changes that were taking place around us, and while not criticising anybody in the university, he made it possible for me and for others to play a larger part in university life. He used to say, I think, that the first 500 years of any institution's history is always the most difficult. And whenever there was trouble, he would repeat that phrase, recognising that universities were ancient institutions, but they were institutions that had to have the free thinking, the dynamism of creative minds working together, the challenge to traditional thinking. And he recognised that that was what a university was about.
He was the first member of the royal family to give an interview on television. He used it to warn about the state of Britain's technical skills.
Our rate of increase in productivity in this country is lower than most countries in Europe. That may have something to do with the fact that we haven't got enough people who are technically trained in industry.
What you're really out to do is to change a way of thinking.
And we know perfectly well that the people in this country have got a remarkable talent for things if they learn how to do them.
Technical training remains an important issue for the Duke. Today he's visiting Sheffield Hallam University.
Can we just welcome you to our authentic operating theatre? And our patient is a live patient that we're going to do a local anaesthetic on.
You volunteered for this?
Yes, I was volunteered.
This poor chap's got a brain tumour just down here in this part of his brain. You can see it's started to squash this part of the brain here. Now, if you come over and see Jeremy over here...
How do you record the position of the thing?
We
because it's in 2 dimensions. I mean, you really need to be in 3 dimensions.
This is exactly why we use this model system here. We've got the prostate in here, and we've got the rectum at the back there. And that's the real problem, is how to get enough dose into the prostate to kill it.
We've changed places.
Yes, we've come down the body ever so slightly into the brain.
I did expect him to be a little bit taller. I know that sounds really silly. He has a nice sort of feel to him. He smiles a lot, which I think is quite nice, and he seems to be very relaxed.
I don't feel well.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Frankly, you don't look well.
Always a forward thinker, the Duke has had mixed results trying out new ideas in other areas, among them the modern media. Spring 2008. Windsor and the world's media await the most glamorous state visit in years. The Queen and the Duke will host President Nicolas Sarkozy of France and Carla Bruni, his new bride.
This state visit is, of course, for us something very special, because the French president and his new wife will be here in this very beautiful castle. We don't know yet if she will curtsy, but we have been told that she has been practicing a lot, so perhaps she will do it. We hope.
State visits used to be confined to London. It was the Duke's idea to revive the tradition of staging them at Windsor Castle. The Duke guides his guests through the protocol. Inside, the media have their photo opportunity. But it's a private occasion as the two couples exchange gifts.
Stamps.
Yeah, I like stamps.
So we've got some.
En tant cordial. Sur les cheveux. Parce que
très intéressant.
Avec ma femme, nous voudrions vous offrir.
Ah, la Ligue.
La Ligue, c'est la Ligue.
C'est de Shakespeare. Duncan's horses.
The Duke has been given a bronze hunting dog. The high point of the visit is a state banquet for 160 in St. George's Hall.
I wish you and Madame Sarkozy a happy visit to this country. And I now ask everyone to raise their glasses and drink a toast to His Excellency the President of the French Republic, Madame Sarkozy, and the people of France.
Thank you very much.
Royalty has always been associated with tradition and spectacle. But today, people's expectations are harder to manage.
The royal family has got an extraordinarily difficult line to tread. The principle of kinship depends on a certain degree of mystery. If it becomes too mysterious, and too oppressive, as it were, then the loyalty to the crown will disappear. And if you say, oh no, they're not special, they are perfectly all right, they eat cheese sandwiches and they sometimes do the washing up, to that extent you are saying, well, kings are, queens are, they're just like the rest of us. Well, if they are just like the rest of us, then eventually they would lose the kind of place which they have in our affections and our imaginations and in the attention we pay to them.
At the start of the Queen's reign, royal relations with the press were left to Commander Richard Colville.
Commander Colville's idea of dealing with the press was to sort of mince across the gravel and pin a note to the railings at Buckingham Palace saying the Queen has been safely delivered of a princess, or whatever, that's it. And he regarded his job as keeping the press at bay.
The Duke was to take a radically different approach. He granted unprecedented access to the media. He even starred in a film for the National Playing Fields Association, promoting proper recreational facilities for children.
Who done that? I'm about fed up with you. You ain't dragging our tongues onto you. Come. Place covered, Alex, over here.
What do you boys want?
We want to see the boss.
What's the trouble?
What do you want to see me about? God. Well, come on.
As donations trebled, the royal patron raised his charity's profile even further through the new medium of television.
It is to have you with us in the... I'm sure I don't need to tell grandstand viewers about the value of playing fields, but I think you ought to know that we still haven't got anything like enough. I've arranged to open 10 schemes this afternoon in different parts of the country which have recently been completed.
After his 1956 world tour, he became the first member of the royal family to present his own television program.
Seychelles Islands, and I've got one here. It's a dried one. This is the nut, so to speak, rather like a dried coconut. It otherwise would look like a coconut. Very peculiar shape, as you can see.
This new attitude to the media culminated in a pivotal moment in modern royal history. The Duke decided to admit cameras to film his young family at home.
The whole question of the royal family film, which was shown in 1969, was an exercise in letting the cameras in and to show the royal family what they were doing, much more, to some extent, a look behind the scenes.
What's this for? What's this for?
Well, it's for helping things, turning things over.
Prince Philip, in some ways, his instincts would have been against all that. But he could see that actually you had to do it, and you had to let light in on the institution, and television was a fact of life, and the royal family had to take account of it. And so, okay, if it meant that you had to be seen to be doing certain things on television, then so be it. Life was changing.
We hadn't really ever heard them speak before, except when they made speeches, which is, of course, rather different.
We see if this is strong enough to...
Get off! Get off! I want you to say.
And we certainly hadn't heard them speaking to each other, for example.
What do you mean to do that?
A lot of people will now say that that was a disastrous mistake, and that once they'd done that, the floodgates opened and led to all the things that were happening in the 90s, with people having their telephones tapped and, you know, the sort of intrusive media. But I don't really think they had any alternative.
The nation was gripped. 30 million tuned in, a record for a documentary. The program set the scene for 2 decades of cordial royal relations with the media. But the Duke had already experienced how intrusive the press could be.
This is business of overhearing conversations. I mean, if you're having a conversation and somebody pokes one of these at you with a tape recorder behind, or one of those long listening devices which they can overhear a conversation 20 yards away, you get a bit anxious.
This is what you specifically object.
Well, I don't know what this is about.
It was a quote, I think, which appeared on television that you suggested to a chap with one of these things how he might dispose of it during private conversation.
I'm delighted he took it down. I hope he did it.
The fact is the royal family had to change. They had to allow the cameras in. They had to let some light into the magic. Otherwise, they'd have become a complete irrelevance. And I think the prince was absolutely right to want to do that. You can criticise what happened subsequently, but you kind of lose control of these things.
In tomorrow's concluding portrait of the Duke.
Best thing that happened, most of these high-rise down there are disasters, most of them.
Yeah.
They're all right for elderly people.
I was allowed to read the letters. They are very touching letters. He expressed the feeling that, you know, he himself had been a newcomer to the family once.
When he said to the president of Nigeria, "Oh, you look like you're ready for bed," it's the sort of thing that when you look at somebody and you do think, "Oh, that looks like a pair of pyjamas," and you think, "I better not say that."
And of course, this is where the infamous incident of the hen harriers is supposed to have taken place. I think the whole thing was a complete invention.
The Duke of Edinburgh is showing me around Sandringham, the royal family's private estate in Norfolk. It's an opportunity to discover a side of the Duke we don't usually see.
Well, there's a muntjac deer just went in. Yes. There was a little, ghastly little deer.
Yes, they don't look terribly attractive.
They're very good to eat, I have to say.
Are they?
Yes. Of course, this is where the infamous incident of the hen harriers is supposed to have taken place.
In October 2007, Sandringham attracted press attention after claims that a protected hen harrier had been shot. Fingers were pointed at Prince Harry.
This under-warden or whatever suddenly reported people shooting hen harriers. It was absolute nonsense. There weren't any there anyway. Well, no one had seen one anyway. In fact, there were masses of bird watchers down here at the time, and not a single one reported seeing a marsh harrier. So I think the whole thing was a complete invention.
The press are always looking for a royal headline. Over the years, abrasive comments attributed to the Duke have caused controversy.
When he said to the president of Nigeria, "Oh, you look like you're ready for bed," because he had his tribal robes on. It's the sort of thing that when you look at somebody and you do think, "Oh, that looks like a pair of pyjamas," and you think, "I better not say that because it's inappropriate to say it." There's something refreshing about someone that does put that out there. Many times the Duke of Edinburgh is a gift to the media because he will be incredibly rude to them and that becomes the story, or he'll say something inappropriate and that becomes the story.
They're expected to represent us in the best possible way to the widest possible number of people. And when they get that wrong with inappropriate remarks about slanty eyes or deli belly or whatever it is that he's had, then of course we're going to pick on that, because he's not meant to do that.
I think that on many circumstances he just wishes to try and, as it were, puncture the balloon, to deflate the thing, and will occasionally pass a jocular remark. And there are all these po-faced journalists who write it down as though this is some great statement, that this is a pronouncement of some important kind. But I suppose he's got used to it.
None of us really want to see comments made about us if they are misinformed. And undoubtedly, in the vast spectrum of the media, of course there's going to be things that the facts are wrong.
For more than 30 years, royal photographer Arthur Edwards has followed the Duke all over the world.
How would you characterise the relationship between the Duke of Edinburgh and the press?
Well, sometimes it's brilliant. Absolutely, like tonight. It was just fabulous. He wanted to chat about everything. Other times it can be very, very frosty.
But when he gets angry, he has a habit of letting people know.
Oh, no messing. I mean,
he speaks his mind.
This was over the incident where the Queen was going to an Aboriginal show, dance music, and the Prince said to them, "Are you still chucking spears at each other?" Well, the papers went crazy, but 2 days later, of course, by which time all the papers had come back to the palace, he was spitting feathers, and he let us know in uncertain terms. You know, that was a private conversation. You don't know the background to it, and and he really told us that we were all out of order.
Despite that, the Duke is never afraid to express an opinion.
Is there much organic farming here, sir?
Yes, quite a lot. But organic, it's not an unmixed blessing, and it's not an absolute certainty that it's quite as useful as it sounds.
I wonder whether to some extent people have gone overboard about organic farming. I mean,
well, you've got to be emotionally committed to it. But if you stand back and try to be open-minded about it, it is quite difficult to really find where it's been a real benefit. This is all organic, all this area.
Yeah.
The Duke has been responsible for the estate for over 55 years.
When the weather is better, this must be absolutely glorious. And you like painting in some of these scenes, do you?
Well, occasionally, yes.
Have you always painted?
No, not always, no. A friend of mine persuaded me to try.
Yes.
I was just a sort of jolly.
So this is the painting.
Jonathan Yeo, one of Britain's leading portrait painters, has been commissioned by one of the Duke's charities to paint their patron.
First letter I got, it says the dress for the sittings will be lounge suit. I hadn't really thought about what he should wear, but, lounge suit sounds fine. Please could you advise me as to what you wish His Royal Highness to wear? It's like, oh, I see, I've got to wear the lounge suit. Ah, right.
The portrait was painted in 4 sittings at Buckingham Palace.
Never before have I found someone who's so different from their persona. A sort of image of him as a slightly sort of distant old buffer couldn't be further from the truth. I just had this sense of him constantly sort of saying things almost to put me off. A lot of the things were thrown out, sort of tested, what do you think about the sort of situation in Afghanistan, and jumping onto a sort of scientific research, and then sort of discussing the Lucian Freud exhibition. One of the things he kept asking about was, why I was mixing certain paints and using certain brushes in certain ways, and I sort of said, well, have you ever done any painting yourself? And he said, oh, I'm glad you asked, I've just taken it up again recently. He came in and he said, oh, I've got something to show you, and produces pictures he's done. And I look at them, I was like, oh, actually, they're not that bad at all. It was kind of Gauguin-esque. He's experimenting. He's obviously someone who, it's not someone who just picked it up and had a stab at it. He's obviously tried to sort of learn a bit about how to do it. He's obviously had someone who's quite a good teacher at some point along the way.
The Duke has been interested in painting ever since he was a young man.
It's rather nostalgic to think that he signs his pictures with the Greek P. It's a lovely touch, that, because, of course, he's not Greek at all. The Greek royal family were Danes.
I think there is romantic, sentimental streak to Prince Philip, but he is passionate about not letting us see it. He wants us to think of himself as being the quintessentially abrupt, sharp, insensitive character who calls a spade and doesn't mess around. Whereas, in fact, in the book, we actually had a photograph of a painting that he'd done of the Queen having breakfast. And it's charming. Couldn't be nicer. But he is not really comfortable with the rest of us thinking that, even though I think it's there.
It was during this Commonwealth tour in 1956 on board the Royal Yacht Britannia that the Duke filmed the artist Edward Seago.
Watching Seago doing his work, I think, was a great encouragement. I think his interest in painting, it came from looking at nature, bird watching, then wanting to, first of all, photograph. He used to be a fantastically keen photographer. I mean, a lot of his, both cine and single photographs.
At the same time, the Duke was pursuing another passion, the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme.
As a girly girl, I didn't know if I would really be suited to that kind of thing, but I learnt a lot about my determination. I remember eating lots of chocolate for the energy to get me to the end. I'm Catherine Jenkins, I'm a classical singer, and I achieved the Bronze and the Silver Duke of Edinburgh Awards.
My name's Charles Clark, Member of Parliament for Norwich South, Gold Award holder.
I'm Ashley Jensen, I'm an actress, and I couldn't understand why everyone didn't do the Duke of Edinburgh Award.
Right, guys? 52 years ago, Prince Philip created the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. His son, the Earl of Wessex, is now very actively involved.
The appeal of the award is actually really pretty simple. It's about having fun.
People of all backgrounds are working towards their bronze, silver or gold awards.
Action.
These teenagers from Upland School in Dorset are following more than 6 million others who have been through the scheme.
It's about encouraging young people to do things that they're either already doing or maybe things that they really haven't thought about doing, and encouraging them to get involved in those activities.
Hi, my name's Bethany Williams and my service is lifeguarding, and we also did a sponsored swim for the RNLI.
Hi, my name's Eileen Stone, I'm 15 years old and I've always loved fashion and it's something I want to go into in the future.
You're not really competing with other people, you're competing absolutely at your own level, and it's an achievement for yourself. This is for my helping at the primary school. She communicated easily with the class at their level.
Today, these Gold Award holders have been invited to St James's Palace to receive their certificates.
When we went to Holyrood Palace to receive our Gold Award, we didn't actually get to meet him. We met Mr Tunnock of Tunnock's Tea Cakes, of which I'm a huge fan, it has to be said, but I was a little bit disappointed not to meet the Duke of Edinburgh himself.
The Duke of Edinburgh will come in through that door there at round about 11:30. He's very rarely late. He's almost always on time or early, so we do have to be on our toes.
For all those who are potentially interested in Duke of Edinburgh, come down, you get tea and biscuits, and you get to meet someone in royalty. What more can you do?
He's fun, he's feisty, he's flirty, he's a game guy. I don't know if you're allowed to say that about the husband of the monarch, but he is, and that comes across today.
Did you all walk for your expeditions?
No. Yeah, I did.
No pedlars or paddlers? Or...
I canoed.
You canoed,
I
did you?
did.
Did you get you taken up to the top of the river, put in the thing, you just float down?
Or rather fall in my case.
You fell in, did you?
Yeah.
Oh dear.
They set them challenges. They set them goals. You have to improve on your own ability. You have to strive to achieve.
I think I was always quite a focused teenager anyway, but I learned a lot about myself. I think it's that realisation that you're out on your own.
What I learnt was to take decisions, get involved, engage with problems rather than thinking they'd go away.
Anybody do any conservation work, did you?
Conservation in Belize jungle, where the SAS used to train, right up in the remote jungle.
Yeah.
It was brilliant.
It's lovely part of it, yes. It looks rather like sort of Sussex, doesn't it, in places? It's amazing, yeah.
The Earl of Wessex achieved the Gold Award himself in 1986.
I got involved only because I made the mistake of doing it. I got involved when I was still at school, and I was at Gordonston, which was where the whole thing started. And that, fun enough, was the first I'd ever heard about it.
One of Gordonston's very first pupils was the Duke.
It was a tiny little experimental place in, forgive me, the middle of nowhere. It was very remote, very unusual, very Spartan and tough. It, I think, helped to make Prince Philip into a very unusual person.
The school's founder was Dr. Kurt Hahn, an educational pioneer.
I remember talking to Prince Philip about Kurt Hahn, and suddenly you could feel him becoming interested for the first time. Kurt Hahn was opposed to conventional games and preferred the idea of service and climbing mountains and sailing.
Hahn soon spotted star potential in the boy who would become his most famous pupil.
One thing you can definitely say, that he was one of those boys who very early rendered disinterested service and who never asked for any privilege on account of his birth.
The scheme was established in 1956. It was open to all. But there was a great deal of opposition.
Go!
When it first started, it was regarded as being extremely radical, and it was done against the run of play. I mean, the Boy Scouts hated the award scheme. So did, the Welsh and the Scots, because they thought it was an English nationalist thing. And the Conservative Party in particular absolutely hated the idea of it.
There were comments made that, what is this man trying to form a sort of youth organisation? And I'm not sure that somebody didn't actually say a Hitler youth organisation. But the fact of the matter is, today, there are over 6 million youngsters worldwide have done the Duke of Edinburgh's award.
2 years later, the Duke began exporting his ideas through the Commonwealth. Today, in Uganda, it's called the Source of the Nile Award. Katende Mukabe is local supervisor.
The Duke was thinking for the youth, what is good for the youth and the future of the world, because the youth hold the future of the world. The children are trying to help the old mama here, because they found out that she is taking care of 2 orphans. She had no kitchen, and her situation was really appalling.
Uganda is one of 53 former colonies that make up the Commonwealth, the family of nations that accounts for nearly 2 billion people. At its head is the Queen.
I think the Commonwealth is particularly important to the Queen, and therefore by extension to Prince Philip, because the Queen's father was the king of a quarter of the world. There's a sense of history and of a global reach and importance that the family still has because of the Commonwealth that it had during the imperial days.
At St James's Palace, the Queen and the Duke are holding a lunch for the speakers of Commonwealth parliaments.
And I will simply say, Mr. Michael Martin, and he shall shake your hand. Perhaps you could just dip your head in the usual sort of way. And then Lady Hayman, perhaps a little curtsy would be great. And then the Duke of Edinburgh will come in behind, of course. At that moment, perhaps, Mr. Martin, you could go behind Lady Hayman to take the Queen up the stairs. Keep to the wall, please, Mr. Martin. There'll be nobody on the stairs here.
Who would be first in the line?
It's Mr. Speaker Chatterjee.
Speaker Chatterjee. Without hesitation, you can introduce yourself. That will be a help. That'd be an immense help to both of us.
The Duke of Edinburgh has been known not only as a concert, but as a believer in Commonwealth, spirit of Commonwealth, and has been going to different countries to meet with the people, and therefore he has a lot of admirers in my country also.
But you weren't doing that last time I saw you, I don't think.
No, I think we were
Were you expecting to get to this? Exactly. We were paddling together for bloody miles. How's it going?
Fun, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we do miss you, though. You haven't come for a while.
No. But aren't you celebrating some anniversary? Or am I
The National Trust, yes, 50 years coming this year.
It's this year, is it?
Yes, it is, yes.
Oh, good. Oh, congratulations.
Thank you, Horace.
Give him my regards.
The Duke has often toured the Commonwealth on the Queen's behalf. He's paid 223 solo visits to 67 Commonwealth territories.
And I went to the Olympic Games in Melbourne in 1956. And after that, I came home in the yacht across the South Pacific into the Antarctic Peninsula and up the South Atlantic.
On his epic 1956 solo tour of the Commonwealth, the Duke kept a remarkable record on his cine camera. It's never been shown outside the royal family, until now. At home, though, some people suggested that the tour was too long.
There were rumours of a royal rift. Yes, he was away for a long time. Yes, the children were very small, and his absence included Christmas. And, it still rankles with him, I think, that even all these years afterwards, people still say, oh, well, you went on that fantastic jolly and it was great fun. I don't think that was what was going through his mind. He actually thought that, we have a Commonwealth, well, let's go and, show the flag, if you like.
Every 2 years, there's a gathering of all the Commonwealth leaders. This year, it's in Uganda. The Queen, accompanied by the Duke, will open the proceedings in the capital, Kampala.
Uganda's been through some pretty black days. For very many Ugandans, having a state visit is enormously important. It signals that Uganda is back in its rightful place in the community of nations.
It's 53 years since the Queen and the Duke last visited Uganda.
When we arrived, and I was in a car behind them, driving from the airport, I would have guessed probably 1 million people were lining the road to see them.
They are the embodiment, the symbol of the Commonwealth, and it's incredible watching the crowd react to them through the force of their popularity. They've done a lot to keep the Commonwealth together.
When I signal for you like this, then we shall all start. Can I see that, everybody? There is a boy there who is not smiling.
The Duke accompanies the Queen to Kitante Primary School.
And then the next one.
At Kidukuru Hospital for Children with HIV, the visit is a cause for celebration and a show.
That is what we used to put on those days. Wow, they look so nice, don't they? And now, the modern Chikanda wear by Brenda and Oliver.
Brenda! 2, 3.
For the first time, the next generation of royals is here too.
Today, huge chunks of the British Commonwealth have come to live in the United Kingdom. And in many ways, this country is now far more representative of the Commonwealth than it ever has been before. And people have ties to the Commonwealth now. People go back and forward. So it may be that in the 21st century, rather than dying out, the Commonwealth to this country and to its people will become more important. And if that's the case, then the country will owe a great debt of gratitude to the Queen for helping to keep the Commonwealth alive.
Away from official engagements, the Duke takes every opportunity to unwind.
This way, you idiots! We're not going around for you.
The Duke of Edinburgh is one of the very few people to have had a game of tennis near the South Pole.
Now here is a very historic picture. This is the President of the British Association for the Advancement of Science playing the very first game of tennis in the Antarctic Circle.
A sport, I suppose, started at school. I mean, he was very good at cricket. He was very good at most games. He was a very good sailor. He's not a great spectator. He likes actually taking part.
Particular cricket, and asked if I've seen the latest scores.
One of cricket's best-known charities, the Lord's Taverners, have him as their patron. Well, sort of.
When he was asked to be patron of the Lord's Taverners when it started in 1950, he thought the patron sounded rather boring, and thought that 12th man sounded a bit more interesting. The 12th man brings the tees on for the cricket pitch, and he thought that was quite a good fun idea.
Today, the Duke has invited England's new county champions, male and female, to Buckingham Palace to receive their medals.
Well, just collect the medals. We'll gather around here. Tallest at the back, shortest at the front.
For a competitive young man like the Duke, though, cricket was not enough. His uncle, Lord Mountbatten, had a bright idea soon after Prince Philip's marriage to Princess Elizabeth.
But my father kept saying to her, you know, Philip would love this, because it's a very fast, very dangerous, very exciting game. It would suit him pound for gram. And she said, no, don't say anything, don't push it, don't nag, just leave it alone. And gradually, as the weeks went by, Prince Philip would sort of drive past the polo ground and have a look in the distance. Then he'd come and sit in a stand, and then he'd have a practice. And then, of course, he played wonderful polo himself.
At the age of 50, he switched from saddle to seat and tried carriage driving.
This way, you bloody idiots! We're not turning around there for you. Stupid. Get on.
It can be very dangerous. Prince Philip's had some very bad years. I think one particular year he turned over 3 times.
Oh, you idiot!
And Prince Philip was an excellent competitor, due, and a noise like a sort of express train coming got louder and louder, and round the corner came Prince Philip's 4 ponies, pulling a carriage on its side. No sign of Prince Philip. So the carriage was put on its wheels again, and it seemed to be quite all right. So Prince Philip said, right, I'll carry on. And he did carry on. He came 3rd.
He believes that if you do something, you should do it properly. And that extends beyond actually participating. So that, you know, when it came to equestrianism, he actually, you know, wrote the rules.
It was the same story with another favourite sport, sailing. He rewrote the racing rules of the Royal Yacht Squadron in Cowes.
When he was our Commodore, he introduced a number of quite important modifications to our affairs. He came ashore one day and said he was completely confused by all the different rules and regulations, and something perhaps should be done about this. I think it was under his leadership. All starts were on one line, and it was a lot easier for competitors to work out what they were supposed to be doing.
These days, he keeps up the carriage driving here at Sandringham.
But I like coming here with the ponies, because you can drive all over the place, and you can go in a different direction every day.
You must take a great deal of satisfaction from what you've accomplished with this estate, having been asked by the Queen to...
Well, it's keeping it going. I mean, you know, so another generation's going to move in, and while we've been here, we've tried to sort of keep it going and earn its keep, and also the sheer pleasure of being here.
Today, the Duke has many places he can call home, but his early life was very different.
His mother had what one might call a religious crisis, nervous breakdown. Prince Philip was taken out for a walk one day, and when he came back, his mother had gone. From 1930 onwards, when, let's face it, he would only have been 9 years old, he really was going from pillar to post, and I think that's where you find him, his character coming out, and him, as I say, making the best of it.
His father died in Monaco in 1944. By that time, his mother had recovered and returned to Greece. During the German occupation in World War II, she kept a secret.
She hid a family called Cohen, and I met the, as it were, young Mr. Cohen. He was then about 84 years old in Paris some years ago. Many years later it came to light, and she was given a posthumous Yad Vashem award, which is an award given to a Gentile who's helped Jews under difficult situation. Neither Prince Philip nor his sister were aware of this at all, and nor were they surprised about that, because they said that's how she was.
The Duke's mother spent her last 2 years at Buckingham Palace with her son and his young family.
Prince Philip has always been very much the head of the family privately, which is what the Queen wants. because she thinks it's the natural state of things, and it's right. Because, of course, don't forget, we're talking about a generation, or 2 or 3 generations ago, when we all thought like that.
He's always had a very strong sense of duty and obligation. You know, it comes from a generation that, after all, fought through the war, and they perceived things differently from the generation that came after them. I think he feels that the younger generation don't have quite that sense of duty.
He had a very close relationship with Princess Anne.
Princess Anne is very much her father's daughter. I think she thinks in exactly the same way. She has the same sort of compartmentalised brain. She has the same sort of very sharp, instant response, intelligent thinking things through attitude to things.
There is a gap of more than 10 years between Princess Anne and Prince Andrew. In due course, it is the youngest child, Prince Edward, who will inherit the title of Duke of Edinburgh.
He's very close to Prince Edward. I think he and his wife Sophie, I think they all sort of very often, you know, have a nice time sitting watching the television together.
Prince Philip was very good with the younger boys. Prince Charles is such a sensitive person that he seems to have found it difficult with his father in the early ages.
They both paint, they're both interested in the countryside, they're both interested in schemes to do with young people and so on. I think the crucial difference, particularly with the two of them as younger men, was that on the one hand Prince Philip was very anxious that we shouldn't know about this romantic, sentimental side of his nature, whereas Prince Charles is extremely anxious that we should all know exactly how sensitive he is about such issues.
Behind the scenes, the Duke of Edinburgh has obviously been trying to guide Diana over the years, certainly trying to guide Sarah Ferguson, because he knew that their behaviour was crucial to the future of the monarchy. If you look at the Duke of Edinburgh now, he's also modernised, if you like, in his parenting, because if you look at the relationship that he has with his grandchildren, it's much softer than he was perhaps perceived as a father.
The night before the funeral of Princess Diana, Prince William was not at all sure whether he wanted to walk in the funeral procession because of the media hoo-ha that had been going on in that week.
The chief mourners, Prince Charles and his son, Prince William and Prince Harry, and on the right, Earl Spencer, emerging from St James's Palace, Duke of Edinburgh behind Earl Spencer.
And Prince Philip said to him two things. He first of all said, I think that when you're older, you'd very much regret it if you didn't walk behind your mother's coffin.
Take their places behind it.
And then he said to him, and I'll walk with you. I think that answers everything you need to know about Prince Philip as a grandfather.
I wondered where the Duke of Edinburgh was when I saw the gates of Buckingham Palace. I should have thought of it. He, of course, going to walk to, a gentleman of 75 years old.
Sort of almost immediately after Diana's death and throughout the 10 years following up to the inquest, allegations have swirled around about a possible involvement of the royal family in some sort of murder conspiracy. Because of alleged bad relations between the Duke and Diana, the focus was very much on the Duke of Edinburgh.
I think, like all relationships, probably between daughter-in-law and father-in-law, there were good times and there were bad times. There were times when they got on well together, there were other times when they did not get on together.
Over the years, there were allegations that the Duke had written hostile letters to his daughter-in-law. The palace preferred not to comment.
That was a private matter, and I think there's a very clear division in the royal family's private matters and their public face. And I think what particular support Prince Philip or the Queen have given to members of their family is as private as you and I would hope to have our dealings with members of our family. So yes, because they're not going to publicise it, then there is the opportunity to think that nothing is happening.
Today the Duke sent his most senior advisor, Brigadier Sir Miles Hunt Davies, to the High Court in an attempt to set the record straight. The Brigadier brought with him the letters which have given rise to so many rumours. Extracts were published by the court.
At the inquest, the coroner declared that there was not a shred of evidence against the Duke.
There was a time when there had been a suggestion that he had called her a harlot, and as a result of this I was allowed to read the letters, and I can assure you he did no such thing. They are very touching letters. They were showing enormous concern. You know, he was really trying to do anything he could to keep the marriage together. He expressed the feeling that, you know, he himself had been a newcomer to the family once and a certain amount about what he'd been through, and so how he did understand that. And I, you know, contrary to what some of the people have said on her behalf, I think she was very appreciative of this help. Unfortunately, of course, in the end, the dialogue broke down, but that's another story.
The Commodore of the Royal Yacht Squadron, Lord Iliff, has come to see the Duke of Edinburgh.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. How may I help you?
The day might start at Buckingham Palace with a number of audiences where Prince Philip may receive any one of the representatives from 773 organisations of which he's patron.
We probably spent about half an hour talking things over and chatting about the affairs of the squadron.
If he has taken on a charity or a patronage, that is something that has his support as and when it's needed. And he keeps constantly in touch with the ones that wish to still use his patronage.
The Duke is a former president of the National Federation of Housing Associations. Near Windsor, the residents of this once neglected estate have turned its fortunes around.
The flats really were dilapidated. You couldn't get anybody to come, even the pizza men wouldn't deliver here.
Yes, I am. This lot?
Yes, all this lot, yes.
Any signs of intelligence?
Oh, a lot of intelligence. Yes, absolutely.
This is
our office, yeah. Surprising what you can get on the space of 2 blocks of flats, you know.
It makes much better use of the space.
Well, it does, but...
Come in. Welcome to my humble abode.
Good grief, what's going on here?
That's the machine that chewed up the concrete when they chewed the building down.
Beak it's got.
Yeah. It's like a dinosaur. Yeah.
Best thing that had happened in most of these high-rise down there are disasters, most of them.
Yeah.
They're all right for elderly people.
Yeah.
But not for families.
No, no good for families at all. The pigeons having a shower there.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, pleasure.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
He is never a figurehead. He's always the driving force with so many of them. In fact, one of his earlier secretaries said to me, we like to tilt at windmills, and the more difficult the challenge, the greater their relish.
The Duke has arranged an evening in support of the Cutty Sark Trust, a charity he helped to create. He's taken over the Palace Cinema for the night.
The room we're in today is the cinema, and it's been used as such since the Queen moved here in 1952. It's used occasionally for the showing of staff films, but the majority of the time it's used for staff briefings and for more formal presentations such as today.
The Duke of Edinburgh is concerned about many aspects of life, particularly those that are good but are in danger, and the past is always in danger, so the Cutty Sark was an obvious cause that he would back.
In 1954, the Duke and the Trust secured a permanent home for the old tea clipper in London.
The Cutty-Sark was actually floated in from the Thames into its current berth at Greenwich. His heart is absolutely there right from those days. Right through his whole life, he's been passionate about the sea, and not just the boats, but what they stand for and the lives on them.
Tonight's a chance to remember the ship as she was. But now she's in trouble again. During important renovation work, the ship was recently devastated by fire.
The Duke came to visit the ship for a considerable amount of time the day after. Now, we all know how busy his schedule is.
When I went down to see her, I was struck by the fact that she had actually got through it extraordinarily well. And I've had a certain amount of experience with fires. And trying to restore things afterwards.
Britain has changed more in the time that Prince Philip has been consort to the Queen than at any time in our history. We live in a more mobile age, a less deferential age, an age when even institutions like the monarchy have to earn their place in society. But actually, when you look at the different world he came from, it's been remarkable he's been able to keep pace with things the way he has.
It's a curious thing to say about somebody who, in a sense, is absolutely the head of the establishment, but at the same time he is naturally against pomposity and self-importance and a certain sort of establishment. It sounds absurd to say that he's egalitarian, but in a way I sometimes think that he's one of nature's Australians, because there is a sort of robust, earthy egalitarianism about him.
So Prince Philip will sit there and you sit here. If you and I look at his record of what he's done, and he's still doing, let's face it, aged 80 whatever, it'd be a very strange person if he didn't think, well, I got that right. I probably got that right. And he, being the person he is, he'll also probably think, I didn't get that right. But, you know, I think, he's a human being.
And you can now switch off. Go and look at your truffles.
Oh,
there's nothing to see.
No, I know, but have you always had an interest in truffles? Do you?
No.
Do you cook? Do you cook?
Not seriously. The great thing about this is there are no trees and no truffles, so you have to have the right sort of organisms that you inject into the plant, apparently.
When do you expect them to come on stream, as it were?
Marcus?
Well, I'm hoping within the next couple of years.
I see.
We're going to have to train dogs from the kennels. And apparently what you should do is when you're having a litter, you should rub truffle oil on the teat of the bitch. Well, that's the plan, anyway.
We should all be dining at your place, Marcus.
No, he's not going to get me.
He's not going to get me.
I won't be home.